The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions and show exactly what it takes to take out Patrick Mahomes. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to a Super Bowl edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today as I am every Monday, but this is an extra special occasion. Locked On NFL expert legacy Louis DiBiase, after his Philadelphia Eagles were crowned Super Bowl champions. On today's show, we're obviously going to talk about where the Chiefs go from here after losing the three-peat, but we got to talk about Jalen Hurts winning MVP and, of course, this Philadelphia Eagles team, because they are one of the most complete football teams we have seen in quite some time. Before we dive in, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. The Eagles are Super Bowl champs, Louis.
And Tyler, Jalen Hurts is the MVP, and he proved all the critics wrong.
100%. And as a matter of fact, we're talking to present Louis. I'll throw it back to past Louis, walking on Broad Street after the Eagles' victory to break down the initial thoughts for the win.
I cannot believe it. The Philadelphia Eagles not only beat one of the greatest teams of all time in the Super Bowl, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but they did it by dropping 40 and blowing them out. Howie Roseman has built one of the greatest teams in NFL history, and they have a ring now to prove it. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, walking around Broad Street. And there's so many storylines to get into, but of course it's Jalen Hurts we got to talk about. He finally got it done. The critics, there's nothing left to say. Less than 10 incompletions in this game, 3 touchdowns, over 200 yards passing, over 70 yards rushing, constant third down, big-time plays. The greatest Eagles quarterback of all time has got his ring, cemented his legacy, outplaying Pat Mahomes in 2 Super Bowls in 3 years. Is that not the most ultimate mic drop of all time? What a win. The Eagles are champions. Fly, Eagles, fly.
I just love all the background noise, the celebration, carrying on. Obviously, we'll talk about Jalen Hurts. He gets the MVP, but, you know, you do such a great job covering the team. As a fan, from an Eagles perspective, winning this championship, what does it all mean?
Yeah, it means everything, and I think it's a little bit sweeter than 2017 because you stopped history today. Everyone knows what was at stake. The Kansas City Chiefs could have won 3 straight Super Bowls, but that's an enormous thing. It's almost an impossible feat. Repeating enough is hard. Mm-hmm. To win 3 straight is unbelievably tough. So to now win 2 championships in under a decade, where I think you beat the 2 greatest players in NFL history, but to do it in the fashion they did, where they completely dominated them for 4 quarters, because the best team on paper doesn't always win, Tyler, and today to see them dominate as the best team, that was icing on the cake. I think it felt a little bit sweeter. Even though 2017 was the first one, this team just overwhelmed Patrick Mahomes with how much talent they had on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I think one thing that I've been talking about with this game, and one of the reasons I picked Philadelphia to win, and I was pretty confident they would win big if you go back to Friday's show from last week before, I think that Philadelphia is such a complete football team. They are like the ultimate football team. For me, what was proven today is the line where, hey, this good quarterback with maybe a mediocre or good roster around him, how does that fare when you truly have a top 3 offensive line, the number 1 running back, top 5 wide receiver duo, top 1 defense, a good quarterback as well, which obviously the quarterback gets MVP. But to me, not to take the shine away from Jalen Hurts and his performance and how clutch he is, because that's absolutely part of having a good football team is you got to have a good quarterback, you know. but just how strong the Eagles were as a football team from top to bottom. Talented coordinators, one of the best DCs we've seen in recent NFL history, maybe ever. Offensive coordinator that's good enough to go be a head coach, and a head coach that's underrated and not given the credit that he deserves for being a leader of men type coach, which everybody loves and is in vogue nowadays. Just the Eagles are just such a complete team and organization from top to bottom that I think it was good for this year to get back to the run game, and defenses are starting to play better and scoring is a little bit down. And you have a team that's really the true essence of what football is all about in the Eagles. That's what I loved about this game and the way that it played out. And it was all Patrick Mahomes, but no, football is a true team sport, and you can't be that much. There can't be that much of a talent gap between the two teams, and just the quarterback be better and it cover it all. Like, football doesn't work that way, and the Eagles proved it, and they're all time as a total roster for that reason.
Yeah, Tyler, look, I mean, if you have a quarterback and a head coach that are historically great, that can mask a lot. It can win championships.
Yes.
That's why the Patriots were a dynasty with so many different cores.
This is the line.
Same with Kansas City.
This is the line.
Right, but at the same time, this game proves there are different ways to build a championship roster in the NFL. And yes, of course, the Eagles did win in large part because of their quarterback and head coach. But Howie Roseman showed that there's different ways to do it. The 2017 team, they won because they threw the football at an elite level, and they had an elite play caller that year in Doug Peterson. This time around, Howie built it with a younger team on defense. He built it from actually back to front this time instead of front to back. He did it by running the football again. It was a battle of two completely different philosophies, and I think that's so cool. And yeah, at the same time, regardless of philosophy, he also just built a flawless roster. I mean, this time, It wasn't just the defensive line carrying them or just the passing game carrying the run game. No, it's the second and third level. There's no more Band-Aid signings. These are all long-term potential stars at every single level. You have stars at each position. On the offense, it's the same thing. You can win by throwing the football. They proved that the last two games, but they proved all year they can win by running the football. So the only real consistent variable in the two championships they've had in under a decade is Howie Roseman, and the way they've won in so many different ways with different quarterbacks and coaches, backups, and running backs. I mean, give the guy a gold jacket. What Howie Roseman has done is truly historic this past decade.
Yeah, and I think obviously we'll get to Jalen Hurts winning the MVP and some of the individual players that deserve a lot of credit for bringing this home for the Eagles. But from, a treetops level here, Howie Roseman to beat, as you mentioned earlier, Tom Brady in a Super Bowl and be in the middle of two championships for Brady, kind of stopping a three-peat in that way with the sandwich effect, if you want to look at it. And then for them to stop the three-peat here with how complete the roster is from top to bottom, you start to look at the last 7-8 years. It's a ton of Brady and it's a ton of Mahomes at the end of the day. And to have two of the three in that gap and for him to put them together the way that I think he absolutely does deserve credit as one of the best executives of all time.
I totally agree. And again, to be two greatest players of all time with a back quarterback, then do it big, run back leading the way, for him to have so much consistency in the chaos that's been these past 8 years in Philadelphia. Again, he's the real only consistent variable outside of Brandon Graham and Lane Johnson. There's nobody else really from that team left. It's Howie Roseman. And for him to rebuild this team where they were in 2020 to now, a 4-year turnaround, again, he is the best. I think he's the best GM in NFL history at building a team. Sustaining has always been a question, but building it from the ground up, from the studs when it feels like all hope is lost, that's Howie Roseman's bread and butter, and that's why they're a champion tonight.
Yeah, I think I go back to a data point from Thursday's show with the data queen, Michelle Majuk. Over the last 25 years since 2000, only 5 teams, the Eagles being the 6th, have made it to the Super Bowl when averaging less than 200 passing yards per game during the season. Right. 4 out of those 5 teams, and now 5 out of 6 because of the Eagles, have won the Super Bowl. The reason that happens, the reason a team can get to the Super Bowl while being such a low producing pass offense is because the rest of the team is absolutely stacked and can impose their will. And I think we saw the reason why that theory holds true. But with that being said, that sounds like it minimizes Jalen Hurts, but Jalen Hurts was the MVP, and we've talked to Past Louie before. We're going to talk to Past Louie again to talk about Jalen Hurts' legacy now after winning this championship. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, Louie, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions. We talked about, the executive, Howie Roseman gets his credit. Nick Sirianni needs his credit. The roster needs their credit. But the quarterback needs his credit too. Jalen Hurts gets the MVP. Another fantastic performance against Patrick Mahomes. He gets the championship this time, gets the trophy. And I want to throw it back to past Louie one more time, because before the game, Louie, I thought you had a very, very good short that you put out about Jalen Hurts' legacy going into the game.
All right, final thought before the big game. And thanks everybody for tuning in each and every day throughout the year. I'm walking around Philly right now because I'm too anxious for this game. I couldn't sleep. Jalen Hurts was the runner-up in 2017 in the national championship against Clemson. He was benched for Tua in the national championship in 2018. He fell just short for the Heisman, fell just short in the college football playoff with Oklahoma, fell just short in Super Bowl 57. He's been knocking on the door for years. This is his moment. I feel it. This is his moment. It's time to finish. Jalen Hurts is going to knock through that door today. He's going to dethrone one of the greatest teams of all time in NFL history to get his first ring. Fly, Eagles, fly.
Louie, that was prophetic. I had to play it. He gets it done. He's not second place anymore. He's finally broken through. What are your thoughts on Jalen Hurts, his performance in this game, first and foremost? But then, generally speaking, his entire build-up to this point and what it means.
I can't believe they're here. I mean, there are so many moments where they were close to not having Jalen Hurts as their franchise quarterback. They drafted him to be Carson Wentz's backup. They almost traded for Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson after 2021 if one of them would have waived their no-trade clause. Like, this was very close to not being a reality. Jalen Hurts was not their plan A, so obviously, yes, they deserve a lot of credit for building around him, but there's a lot of luck in the NFL, and they're lucky to have Jalen Hurts. He was flawless today. The Kansas City Chiefs, they took Saquon Barkley out of this game. At one point, I think midway through the third quarter, he's only averaging 2.6 yards per carry. Like, they took Saquon out. They're stuck in the box, and they dared Jalen Hurts to beat them. He did just that. 17 of 22, 221 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, had 72 yards on the ground, and rushing score. Josh Allen this, Lamar Jackson that, Joe Burrow this, Justin Herbert that. Blah, blah. A 26-year-old quarterback has now outdueled Patrick Mahomes twice in the last 3 Super Bowls and has a ring. I think at this point, I don't know how you say he's not a top 5 quarterback. He's elite in his own way, and I don't know how the critics can come after him anymore. And I'm one of those guys. I got to eat crow. If you go to past Locked On Eagles shows of the last 5 years, there's a lot of times I was doubting this guy, and I don't know how you get him anymore. He's been flawless in the 3 biggest games of his life, the 2 Super Bowls, and 2 weeks ago, the NFC title.
I think it's funny that some people make it a joke of his calm and cool demeanor. He doesn't give any good answers. Like, there are videos out there on the edits of him just saying nothing at podiums. Like, he is a very calm, quiet guy, doesn't talk a big talk at all. So I think it's hilarious that, he is the same exact way in these moments. He is calm. He's cool. He's collected. It's not a game. It's not an act that he's putting on. He truly is that guy. And I think you're right that when you say he's elite in his own ways, because I'm not going to sit up here and act like Jalen Hurts is as gifted of a thrower as some other players in the NFL. He's not as good of a runner as Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen per se, but at the same time, he's so clutch, and that matters so much. And like you've mentioned, in the biggest games of his career, he always steps up. Does he win every time? I don't know, but he gives you a chance to win in the biggest games. And I think when we talked about how good the team is from top to bottom, the entire organization, but the roster specifically, it reminds me of the Rams, where the Rams were stacked as a roster. They had a really, really good roster that year, but Matthew Stafford is still considered like a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And Jalen Hurts absolutely has to be as well, at minimum, a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. You could go up at this point 7, 6, 5. How far? My top 4 is pretty locked in. I can't lie. But like, the point is that Jalen Hurts sometimes is put down, like in the 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And that's just completely untrue, because the consistency week in and week out, and, the accuracy and all that, there may be little hiccups here and there, but he's so clutch and such a playmaker in the big moments. Saquon did get kind of shut down today by the Chiefs, which was unexpected. But who made up for that? It was Jalen Hurts, not only in the air being a quarterback, but leading them in rushing as well. Just an absolutely tremendously clutch performance. I do got to give a shout out. His commercial, his Jordan commercial that came out afterwards. It's amazing. Love Hurts. Folks, if you haven't seen this, go on YouTube, check it out. Love Hurts, Jordan commercial. Just so fantastic. Jalen Hurts seems like a fantastic person, carries himself the right way. And I don't want how good the Eagles roster is get in the way of how great that he's been in both of these runs, quite frankly.
It's not black and white. It's not mutually exclusive. They can have a great roster and a great quarterback. I think you look at the 2013 Seattle Seahawks. They were another team that had a great roster, but they also had a great quarterback. And that's kind of like the comparison is Russell Wilson was elite in his own way. Was he the pocket passer of a Peyton Manning? No. Was Cam Newton? No. Greatness can look different in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And with Jalen, I think he doesn't get enough credit because a lot of what he does that's great is not quantifiable. It's the leadership. It's the clutch gene. Yeah. It's the selflessness this year to say, I'll be the Robin to Saquon's Batman. I could put up the numbers that I did in 2022 and 2023 with a different system. But I know Saquon, I'm dealing with the most historically great run game in the NFL with Saquon in this offensive line, and he took a back seat there until he didn't need to anymore in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I think Jalen, that's the theme for me with him is he's great in his own way. And, yeah, you're right. He's not the best of Joe Burrow or Mahomes or even Lamar or Allen. But it doesn't matter. How do you debate? How do you counter what he's done in 2 Super Bowls? He's outplayed the second best player of all time in 2 championships now, and now he has a ring. Oh, and by the way, he's only 26 years old. So I think it's over. The Jalen Hurts debate, I think it's done.
Yeah, he's clearly one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, top 10 at minimum again, and I think you got to give him that credit. One thing I do want to point out is some guys who didn't win MVP though, who definitely deserve some praise, because that Philadelphia Eagles defense, the defensive line, sacking Patrick Mahomes like this, the Eagles didn't blitz one time in the entire game, just with 4 guys that continued to get pressure. Incredible defensive line with Jalen Carter and Milton Williams, who played fantastic. And Josh Sweat, who was absolutely incredible in the game and now hits free agency. What a great time for him. And, of course, it's the rotation that the Eagles have. Cooper DeJean makes the big play, pick 6. He's been fantastic. Some great open field tackles from DeJean as well. Like, there were so many guys who stepped up big in this game who didn't get MVP like Jalen Hurts, even on the offensive side. A big catch from A.J. Brown on the sideline, Devontae Smith doing it again against the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, it was a total team effort, even with Hurts deserving MVP, and that's who should have got it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, that goes back to Howie Roseman. I think he deserves so much credit for building this defense that was ranked number 26 in the NFL last year. This year was number 1, and they're the youngest defense in football. To do that with the turnaround they did and all the new players is incredible. But he learned from his mistakes. I think in the past he got too smart and didn't draft the best players from the best schools. Then now he built his defensive line through the University of Georgia. He never took defensive backs early in the draft before this year. Quinn Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were instrumental. 3 interceptions combined in this postseason. Zach Bond at linebacker, a first-team All-Pro. I think it goes back to Howie. Like, he's one of his best traits is the self-awareness to reshape his team. He's not bullish in his philosophy, and that led to one of the greatest defensive performances we've seen in a Super Bowl against, oh, by the way, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever.
Yeah, no doubt. And no surprise that when we talk about other people who maybe could have got MVP, like a Josh Sweater or Cooper DeJean, there were no Kansas City Chiefs mentioned because this team really needs to retool on the offensive side of the ball. We'll talk Chiefs and their future going forward. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay, which I love, a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature as well because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally, picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot to win $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Louis, let's cap off this Super Bowl edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Can't believe that the entire season is finally gone. What an incredible football season with a great football team winning at the end. Jalen Hurts obviously deserves his credit. Gets the MVP, absolutely deserved it. But we do got to look at the Chiefs side of things. And my guy, Chris Clark from Locked On Chiefs, talked about their perspective on the loss at the three-peat.
Haven't had to do many of these this season. Chiefs drop the game. They lose 40-22 to the Philadelphia Eagles, a score that actually makes it look closer than the game really was. Kansas City allowed Mahomes to get sacked 6 different times. The problem is they allowed him to get sacked 6 times, and he wasn't blitzed once. This was one of the worst games that their offensive line has played, and one of the biggest stories that's going to be coming out of this, and something that they're going to have to get figured out in the offseason, is the offensive line. But it's also Andy Reid's decision not to make a change and not to go away from what had been working the past couple of weeks, when it was obvious that Joe Thuney and Mike Allender were not going to be the answer at left guard and left tackle in this game. He had the opportunity to make a change, chose not to, and this is what happens with that game. Kansas City will be back in the Super Bowl in the future. I can just about guarantee that. But for right now, there will be much more on Locked On Chiefs soon.
Listen, I'm sure that Kansas City will make it back to a Super Bowl as well. I'm not going to act like that this loss all of a sudden ruins things. But when you go to the Super Bowl and you lose, there definitely is a bit of a hangover. Like the Eagles had to get through that to get back. I wouldn't be shocked if Kansas City, finally did take a little bit of a step back, maybe didn't make it to the Super Bowl next year. But I also wouldn't be shocked if they were right back. The reality is they need to retool that offense. We could talk about the offensive line, which is obviously an issue. They have to get left tackle solved. What happened at left tackle this year, what they're going to do going forward, whether Kingsley Suamataia is going to step up and they develop him into a starter next year, a guy that they just drafted this year, or they go out and make a move. They have to solidify the offensive line. And quite frankly, Juwan Taylor isn't worth the money that he was getting paid on the contract that they gave him at this point. So I think Trey Smith is a free agent. There's a lot of unknowns going forward with that offensive line. And I think one of the other big problems outside of the offensive line is the general speed of the offense. Rashee Rice not being out there killed them. They have Xavier Worthy, who's obviously a very fast player. That's great. But Kareem Hunt at running back, Pacheco never came back to full speed after his injury. DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster, even Travis Kelce at this point. It sounded like from Mahomes after the game that Kelce might be retiring, is the way that it sounded. He didn't say that, but from the context of what he's explaining, that's what it sounded like to me. So I think the Chiefs need to get faster. Rice will help, but they're too slow, and the offensive line wasn't good enough. And I think Mahomes lifted them up as much as he possibly could this year.
Yeah, I think what the Eagles did today should be a lesson to Kansas City that you shouldn't have to have Patrick Mahomes carry you in the way that he had to this year. It's very reminiscent of 2020 when an elite roster in Tampa Bay, their defensive line made Mahomes run for his entire life in that game, and it made them make quick, fast changes up front with their offensive line. I think the same thing has to happen this year. And yeah, they have to be able to run the ball. Like, they did not establish any sort of ground game the entire game. And early on, that kind of led to the Eagles dominating in time of possession. So, Rice is going to come back. Worthy's going to be a year better. Maybe Hollywood Brown back if they add another receiver. I think they will likely be back within the next year or two because Mahomes and Andy Reid, they're just too great. And the defense is really good. They have pieces. But the offense, like the Eagles showed, they had more than just the quarterback. They had a great quarterback, but they had alphas everywhere. In Kansas City this year, I felt like just didn't do enough to support Patrick Mahomes. And I think it's why the offense underperformed all year, and they didn't have a vertical game really either. They definitely have some work to do. I'm not saying suddenly they're a wild card team next year. I think they'll probably be back in the Super Bowl because Mahomes is so great. But to get it done, Eagles, who's not going anywhere, and all these other teams continuing to improve, like, you got to stay. You can't get left behind. You got to continue to add to this offense and support your franchise quarterback.
Well, I think we also, while we can, it's only smart for us to sit here and say, well, they'll probably be back next year. We can't rule out they'll be back next year, but I do think there's also the chance that this is the beginning of a new phase. Like, you look at Tom Brady's career, quarterbacks are playing for longer. Look at like LeBron James in the NBA. This is the first phase of Mahomes' career. Think Travis Kelce may be retiring. Chris Jones is an older player. They need to really remodel that offensive line. Are they going to be able to keep Trey Smith around as they do this? Is Andy Reid going to be around forever? There's every year it's, is he going to retire? He's not retiring this year. He's going to be back next year. But like, what if they go to the divisional round next year on the road and lose? Is Andy Reid going to come back again in 2026? And then I do think that we saw Brady do this the way that the Patriots won his first couple Super Bowls, and then the remodeling that turned into the Randy Moss version of the New England Patriots. I think while we don't want to overdo the ramifications of this loss on the Chiefs long term, I do think that this might be the beginning of, hey, we got to start building that next version of this team because we won't have Kelce and Chris Jones the way that we had in this version.
It's kind of similar, too, to kind of what Josh Allen went through in Buffalo this year, where they had to reinvent the offense. They lost a lot of their core on defense.
This was their transition year.
Yeah, exactly. I think Mahomes is so great, though, that we'll be back at that stage. But you're 100% right. Like, the life cycle of a quarterback that plays this long, that's going to happen. And I do think they want to get back to a point the early years of Mahomes where they could stretch the field vertically. They had a Tyreek Hill type of presence. And, maybe that is Xavier Worthy. He gets back to that. But I think the way the offense has kind of had to, reshape their identity since Hill has been gone is something that they had to go through. And I think now they might face a new looking offense too. So they're going to go through changes like the entire NFL, but the Eagles, not to keep bringing it back to the Eagles, but let the Eagles lesson. This team has had to win in different ways every single year to stay a consistent contender. And Kansas City is going to have to do that too. It's adapt or die in this league.
As a matter of fact, Louis, I do think we should continue to bring it back to the Philadelphia Eagles because they are the Super Bowl champions. And at the end of the day, I think that we see these swings in the NFL. And this is my big picture NFL take for the season, I guess. And it's just punctuated by the Eagles. Is this year we saw teams go back the other way. We saw the running game, the running backs being more important. We saw with now teams going in the too high. Remember a couple of years ago, it was all wide zone and everybody was playing in the cover one shell with one high safety and having the other safety down in the box because everyone is running that wide zone, Matthew Stafford, Los Angeles Rams stuff. Okay, well, now everybody's starting to back up a little bit more, and we're seeing the opposite take place where defense is starting to be better and the offense is starting to swing back the other way and calm down a little bit, and the run game is back in vogue, and all of that happened. It's like to see it go from the first version of championships with Patrick Mahomes to where the rest of the NFL catches up. And it's like, okay, we're here now. We're doing it this way. And then it's got to go back the other way. So for the cycle this year to very obviously go back towards like running game, too high safeties, trying to take away deep passing, which makes you have to run the ball more. For that to happen and the Eagles to put the exclamation point on that swing back the other way from these last few years of dominant passing games and high scores. It's just so poetic to me. That's my favorite thing about this Eagles championship, is the poetic justice to the sport of football that it is.
I just think it's really cool. The year is 2024, and a running back was the main reason a team won a championship, and it's the main reason that they were able to dethrone a dynasty led by a quarterback and a play caller. You're right. I mean, I think everybody assumed that they had to figure it out, what it took to be a contender in the NFL, and what it took to win a championship, and I totally agree. Quarterback play and head coach, those are the two most important parts, and Jalen Hurts was the main reason you won today. But the Eagles proved that anything can work in the NFL, and I think that should instill hope in pretty much all 32 teams.
Yeah, 100%. Today with the Eagles winning is a hopeful thing for the rest of the NFL that doesn't have a Patrick Mahomes and will most likely not get one. Today is, you can still do it if you do it right. And that's why, again, the Eagles winning, it's poetic justice. But with that being said, it's a great place to step off this train. Super Bowl 59, the Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champs. Jalen Hurts, MVP. Maybe not the most entertaining Super Bowl of all time, but a just Super Bowl for where the NFL is right now. And thank you, football gods, for bringing us back the other way. It's why football is the best game in the world. It always keeps you on your toes. But thank you for a great season. Thank you all for tuning in to every episode all year long. Check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL. You're going to have the mastermind, Ross Jackson, as your host for that one. But that's going to do it for me, your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, my co-host, Legacy Louis DiBiase. Thank you so much for tuning in to Locked On NFL. And as I tell you every episode, stay safe out there.